I remember when I first picked up my very first camera. At the time, it was the Canon T3i, and I remember looking at it and saying, I want to make videos with this. I have no idea how to do it. And I was lucky to have friends and people that actually helped me to understand what different settings were, how to film, and how to make things look pretty, I guess. There were a couple of things that I was always confused on, and it was shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Every time I took the camera and I kind of just went with whatever was already set in the camera. I wanted to go full manual. I was not sure exactly what I was doing. So this video, I kind of want to just let you guys know what shutter speed is and what it does, what aperture is and what it does, as well as ISO. So you can better know how these settings are going to affect your videos. I always thought ISO was super interesting, like that change this ISO and all of a sudden it gets brighter. You put it in a lower ISO and it gets darker, but I never really understood what ISO was. So there is a lot deeper kind of conversation we can get into, but every single camera has its native ISO. For example, my camera right now, the Fujifilm X-T2, the native ISO is 800. It goes all the way to like 12,000 or something like that, and it goes on its lower ISO, I think it's 100 or 200. Many of your cameras might have that, might have like super high and super low. I would encourage you to go online, check out what the native ISO of your camera is, and stick to that one, because if you do, that native ISO is where your camera will perform the best. Every single camera is different, so make sure you know what native ISO your camera is, and just leave it there. Obviously, if you're in certain situations where you're not able to light things properly and you need more light, it's okay to raise up your ISO. But you have to know that a certain level of like a really high ISO, the image tends to fall apart because digitally your camera is trying to bring in light, which there isn't information in there. So make sure to keep your camera's ISO at its native ISO. If you have to go up, that's okay, you can go up a little bit. And if you have to go down, for example, if you're outside and it's super, super, super bright, in order for your photo or your video to be exposed properly, if you have to go down on your ISO, that's fine. It kind of gives you like that freedom to be able to do more. Going down in ISO is good. Going too high in ISO is not good. The image on your camera will fall apart and it's not gonna look really nice. All right, shutter speed. So for video, specifically speaking, you want your shutter speed to be double your frame rate. So for example, if you're shooting 24 frames per second, or if you're shooting in slow motion 60 frames per second, you always want your shutter speed to be double that in order for something called motion blur to look natural, or to look kind of like how we see it in movies, or how we see it even ourselves in our own eyes. If you look at your hands go like that, you don't see perfect fingers, you see blurry fingers. And that's kind of what the shutter speed does. If you have your shutter speed super, super high, you are going to be getting a little more choppy footage. And it's an effect thing. If you guys want to shoot a super high-paced, like, fighting scene or something that needs to be very crisp and clear and not as much as blur, sometimes in movies they do that. They crank up the shutter speed and you're able to see more clearly, people fighting or, certain things like that. And it's an effect, and it's something that we are all able to do in our creative process. So don't dismiss the shutter speed is super important. And that's pretty much it for shutter speed. Now the last one is aperture. The thing about aperture is that it has everything to do with the lens that you have. Most kit lenses have like a 3.5 aperture all the way to 10 or 11 or something like that. But once you get into like prime lenses or like really nice zoom lenses, they tend to have a lower aperture, like 2.8, f2, f1.8, 1.4, 1.2, etc. Most expensive lenses have like a lower aperture, and all aperture is just how big or how small the iris on your lens is. The iris is the little eye inside the lens. And the lower the aperture, the bigger the iris is, meaning more light comes through and you have more shallow depth of field. Shallow depth of field is pretty much what is in focus. Right now, I'm in focus and what's behind me is not. That means that there's a relatively pretty shallow depth of field because this is an f2 lens. And the cool thing about that is that it makes things look more cinematic. It makes people's attention go towards that thing that's in focus, and everything else kind of is blurred out and it's not really taking your attention. And if I want to get really dramatic, I can like put my lens all the way down to whatever f1.4, f1.2, whatever that is, and I can just focus in on whatever I want and everything else is going to be blurred out. It's actually a really cool thing. I prefer really shallow depth of field stuff, but the downside of shallow depth of field is that things are really hard to get into focus. If I move forward or backwards or forwards or backwards, things might get out of focus and back into focus and out of focus. And for video, that's not the most pleasing kind of look. Trying to hunt for focus, it's kind of, I don't know, it doesn't seem very professional. So right now I'm an f2, meaning it's pretty shallow. It's pretty shallow depth of field there. And if I get closer, it might take a little bit for the camera to actually focus on my face. Might have to hunt. I'm sure it found it. And then, you know, it's coming back to trying to focus on me again. But that's pretty much it. To recap, what settings should you have if you want to just start shooting kind of thing? Well, first of all, if you have pretty good light, put your ISO on your native ISO. Put your shutter speed, double your frame rate. So if you're shooting just normal stuff, just put it at 1/50th of a second, which is double the 24 frames per second that usually you would be shooting that. And then finally, the aperture. If you want to get really nice shallow depth of field stuff, you know, go as low as 2, 2.8, f4, and just stay within those kind of like lines. Those are pretty standard settings to be able to just start shooting video. So the more that you shoot video, the more pros and cons that you're gonna see in having a lower ISO or a really high aperture, or maybe you wanna boost up that shutter speed and get more like choppy video for some reason. You wanna get like very creative with it. Or maybe you wanna go even lower your shutter speed and get super blurry stuff. It's kind of cool when you know all these things and all these tools that can help you make a story, make a video, and share it, because that's essentially what we're doing. We're making stories, making videos, sharing them, and I hope this helped you in getting started on video, getting started on how to understand what these things are. And I wish I would have found this YouTube video when I was first starting, so I'm making it right now for you guys. If you liked it, make sure to subscribe. I'm going to be making more videos like this, kind of explaining the basics of filmmaking, the basics of cameras, lenses, lights, and all these things that are just tools to help us make better videos. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope this was helpful to you. Give a thumbs up if you liked it, and don't do anything if you didn't like it. Just scroll on by, just move away, click on these other videos on the left, on the right. Maybe there's another one that's even better than this one. If so, click on that one and just, you know, move on, move forward. It's gonna be okay. All right, guys, be creative. Peace.